Protests flare up once again in the United States as demonstrators demand justice following the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis. We'll speak to France 24's Ketivan Gorgesani in just a moment. Space history is made as SpaceX sends humans into orbit for the first time. Astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken are expected to dock with the International Space Station Sunday morning, U.S. Eastern Time. And Parisians return to their beloved city parks as the government continues to progressively ease coronavirus lockdown restrictions. Thank you for joining us here on France 24. Good to be with you. We begin in the United States, where protests have erupted for a fifth consecutive night across several cities. The anger remains raw following the killing of George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, by a white Minneapolis police officer on Monday. That officer has since been taken into custody and charged with third-degree murder. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump condemned the violence, calling protesters, quote, looters and anarchists, and said the country's military was ready to intervene should officials in Minnesota make that request. Aaron Ogunke has the very latest.
Minnesotans clear the aftermath of the fourth straight night of violent protests against the police killing of George Floyd. It's an unprecedented situation for the Midwestern state, so much so that the governor ordered the full mobilization of the Minnesota National Guard, a first in 164 years.
The situation in Minneapolis is no longer in any way about the murder of George Floyd. It is about attacking civil society, instilling fear, and disrupting our great cities.
Minnesota officials blame much of the destruction on what they called well-organized out-of-state instigators, including white supremacist organizations and drug cartels. On Saturday, the U.S. president criticized the Minnesota mayor's response to the protests, urging state officials to, quote, get tougher.
We have our military ready, willing, and able, if they ever want to call our military. But we can have troops in the ground very quickly if they ever want our military.
Protests continue, however, despite the announcement the police officer seen crushing the neck of George Floyd would be charged with manslaughter and third-degree murder. Anger over the killing has spread across the country. Alongside New York, Houston, and Denver, among others, Washington, D.C. also saw demonstrations, culminating in a rally outside the White House.
No justice, no peace!
And in Atlanta, protests descended into chaos Friday, with several public personalities, including Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter, pleading with protesters to demonstrate peacefully.
As we mentioned, the anger, the outrage remains raw 5 days after the death of George Floyd. Some protesters traveled hundreds of kilometers to Minneapolis to protest police brutality. France 24's Ketivan Gorgesani spoke to some of them. Here's what they had to say.
So we drove up 8 hours this morning just to be here, to be feet on the ground, just to stand in solidarity with everyone else that is here. And it's just in support. It was just a matter of just where I've been located in the country. So, with work, sometimes it's really hard. But I said, despite all of that, someone has lost their life. I have to get up and get uncomfortable.
We need to stop making excuses and telling people what they should accept. None of this is acceptable. We are all human. We are all part of the human race.
We live in a society where things like what we saw happen to our brother George Floyd is allowed to happen. See, what happened on Memorial Day was not, people in France probably know about this, but people in France didn't know it wasn't an aberration. It's just, if it wasn't filmed, they would have gotten away with it.
Ketivan Gorgesani joins us now from Minneapolis. Ketivan, you spoke to those protesters. The city is witnessing protests for a fifth consecutive night. What are you seeing right now, and what are protesters around you saying? All right, we're having a few technical difficulties speaking to Kitivan. Hopefully we'll be able to speak to her a little later on in this update. Moving on to some other news now. It's a major milestone in space history. SpaceX has become the first private company to ever put astronauts into space. It's also the first time astronauts have taken off from U.S. soil in 9 years. The company, which was founded by billionaire Elon Musk, has been sending cargo to the International Space Station for several years, but this time it partnered up with NASA to carry 2 humans as well. Fraser Jackson has the story.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 and Crew Dragon. Go NASA, go SpaceX, Godspeed, Bob and Doug.
3:22 p.m. local time, SpaceX Falcon 9 blasts off from Earth and into the history books.
Copy, 1 Alpha.
On board, veteran astronauts Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken, the first American astronauts to lift off from American soil in 9 years, and the first ever to use a commercial rocket to get to space.
Falcon power and telemetry nominal.
Their destination, the International Space Station.
M1D throttle down.
Thank you so much for what you've done for us today, putting America back into low Earth orbit from the Florida coast.
Since the scrapping of the space shuttle in 2011, NASA has relied on Russian spacecraft to get its astronauts into orbit from Kazakhstan. In 2014, the space agency gave contracts totaling $7 billion to Boeing and SpaceX to enable launches from the United States. Both companies launched their crew capsules last year, but software issues plagued Boeing's Starliner as Elon Musk's SpaceX Dragon capsule passed testing and landed on the launch pad ready for the May 30th historic flight. The launch had originally been scheduled for Wednesday, but bad weather forced NASA and SpaceX to abort just 17 minutes before the launch. The mission, dubbed Demo 2, is the final test flight before NASA certifies SpaceX's Dragon capsule for regular crewed missions. Now that it's finally up in space, it will alter its trajectory to line up with the International Space Station. Dragon is expected to dock around 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time.
Well, as we've mentioned, it's the first time a private company sends astronauts into space, and much of that achievement can be attributed to Elon Musk, the founder of SpaceX. Aaron Ogunke tells us more about how the boy born in Pretoria, South Africa, became the man at the helm of a multi-billion-dollar company.
At 48 years old, Elon Musk is now officially the head of the first private company to send astronauts into space.
This is the culmination of a dream. This is a dream come true. If you'd asked me when starting SpaceX if this would happen, I'd be like, 1%.
But a look through the archive suggests Elon Musk never really doubted his ambitions. A naturalized American citizen born in South Africa, the engineer turned businessman got an early start to making his dreams reality. In 1999, he introduced the world to X.com, his first company focused on online banking.
I think X.com could absolutely be a multi-billion-dollar bonanza.
That company would become PayPal and make Elon Musk a multi-millionaire. He then founded Tesla, revolutionizing the market for luxury electric vehicles, worked on the magnetic Hyperloop train, and kept the momentum despite several failed launchings of his reusable rockets. But his final objective is to reach Mars, where he wants to set up colonies with up to 1 million humans by the year 2050.
Just warm it up. If you
with
want.
A blanket or with what? How would you warm Mars up? You know,
Has dropped thermonuclear weapons over the poles.
You're a supervillain. That's what a supervillain does.
The billionaire entrepreneur is indeed no stranger to controversy. Among the most recent, downplaying the coronavirus pandemic and railing against California's stay-at-home orders because of the toll he said they took on his companies.
Saturday brought some good news for millions of people who live in the greater Paris area. For the first time since mid-March, parks have reopened, much to the delight of children and adults. With the number of COVID-19 cases continuing to drop and the unseasonably warm weather these past few days, thousands flocked to the city's parks to enjoy the fresh air they'd missed oh so much. Fraser Jackson has the story.
The gates have now opened, and these Parisians are enjoying the greenery. After 2 months locked in their apartments, Paris's 2 million residents can now enjoy the great outdoors after the government reopened the city's parks.
C'est un vrai plaisir avec le soleil, avec l'herbe, avec l'air frais. Enfin, c'est un plaisir.
Across the city, some children got back to playing. Others were just enjoying the freedom to walk in the fresh air. For some people, time to stop and look at the flowers was a welcome break after 2 months of lockdown. A splash of colour back into the everyday life of those living in one of the most densely populated cities in the world.
On a attendu ça trop longtemps, quoi. Et que quand on est dans un appartement où on n'a ni balcon, ni jardin, donc ni terrasse, ben on est content qu'au bout de la rue, ça ouvre.
However, throughout the park, some reminders that the pandemic is still ongoing. Some park goers are still wearing their masks.
J'ai l'impression que les distances sont respectées. Très peu de gens portent de masques.
Masks are not compulsory in the parks, and the security officers are only making sure gatherings don't exceed 10 people. They're hoping those coming to relax will still respect the rules.
On a notre gel, on se lave les mains régulièrement, on prend garde à ne pas s'approcher trop d'autres familles, les enfants, tout ça aussi.
But with many residents flocking to the city's parks, it's going to be up to people to make sure they maintain social distancing.
Let's go back now to our major developing story out of the United States, a fifth consecutive night of protests across the country. France 24's Kitivan Gorjestani is in the city of Minneapolis, where it all started Monday. Kitivan, good evening. The city is witnessing, again, protests for a fifth consecutive night. What are you seeing right now around you?
Well, right now the situation is still extremely calm, extremely peaceful, and it has been so throughout the day. Earlier today, I saw dozens of people just coming to the neighborhoods that had been looted overnight to come and help clean up the destruction, the rubble outside on the sidewalks. And after that, they all gathered into one intersection near the 5th precinct of Minneapolis. They gathered peacefully. There are hundreds and hundreds of people, maybe a couple of thousand, all gathered very peacefully. It started with chants. There was some dancing, some singing, and of course, a lot of posters, a lot of signs calling for justice, because this is still, even though it is peaceful, there are still people here very angry. They want to see justice for George Floyd. One of the signs, the most common signs, is all for, because they want all 4 police officers to pay the price for what they did to George Floyd, and not just the one police officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck and who has been arrested and charged with third-degree murder. They want to see the 3 others as well. But for now, it's very peaceful. It's just people coming out here trying to express the fact that they're fed up with the situation in the United States. They're saying that this is not an isolated incident. It's not just about George Floyd. It's not just about Minneapolis. It's about the systemic racism in the United States.
Kitivan, you're in Minneapolis right now. The city is under curfew, in theory, from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. That, of course, did not stop protesters from gathering last night. The governor ordered the full mobilization of the National Guard for the first time in more than 150 years. Are local officials expecting the protests tonight to turn violent once again?
Well, they're hoping it's not going to happen, but they are expecting it. And as you said, this unprecedented move by the governor of Minnesota to mobilize the full National Guard, and really the tone has changed. They admitted that they had underestimated the problem of looting and of violence, especially last night, and they're adamant that they're not going to make the same mistake, because last night what we saw is that despite that curfew that started at 8 p.m., really the police forces and the National Guard did not start really moving in and trying to get people to go home. People until late into the night, until at least midnight. And there was a lot of criticism against authorities for simply asking, where were the police forces? Where were the National Guard members when all this looting was happening? So it seems like the governor as well as the mayor have pretty much learned their lesson, and tonight might be a more strict enforcing of that curfew. There definitely will be more forces on the ground present to try to avoid exactly the scenes that we've seen happening in the past few nights, to see these buildings burning and this rioting and looting of businesses. A lot of small businesses being looted, and they said that while the protests are right, this rioting, this looting has no place in Minneapolis or in the rest of the U.S., and that is not what this movement is about. This is about George Floyd, about justice. They understand that, but they have been very, very precise in what they said. They said, go home when that curfew comes on. Do not stay out on the street.
All right, Kitivan Gorgesani, stay safe. Reporting tonight from Minneapolis. Kitivan, thank you very much. Well, we'll continue, of course, to follow this developing story, the protests across the United States. Stay tuned to France 24.